G'day there guys, it's your main man Marky, back at it again with another episode of r/JustnoHOA. Now if you're new to the channel, feel free to subscribe and join my amazing community. This is also the second part out of a 7-part series. So now with that out of the way, I'd love for you to sit back, relax and chuck a prawn on the barbie, and get ready for some good content. FHOA, Recalled and Removed Our Tyrannical HOA Board Part 2. The supposedly good HOA. Takedown. We started looking and we came across a house that we really liked. The issue was, of course, that it was in an HOA, but the agent assured us that this was a good one, and not at all like the last one that we lived in, and he had a point. This development was built in the early 80s, so the CC&Rs were rather condensed. The use restrictions were all of 2 pages, and were essentially the same as the city municipal blight codes. Of course, there was the usual, garbage cans must be stored out of sight, no livestock, etc. But nothing really objectionable. Little did we know that in the previous years the entire board had to be removed, and that there had been 2 earlier lawsuits as well, of all of which we were unaware of. So we bought it, and honestly for the better part of 8 years, it looked like the agent was right after all. This was the rare benign HOA. There were no amenities, very little common area, just a few end caps, and association fees were low, at $38 a month. It made it easy to forget that you were actually living in an HOA, subsequently homeowner apathy was rampant. There were a fair number of rental units and snowbirds, both of which were totally checked out and uninvolved. Nobody ever went to any of the HOA meetings or paid any attention to what was going on, myself included, which opened the door to the issue that would later come. Unbeknownst to us, all the board was slowly being taken over by a guy who was living embodiment of Barney Fife, from the old Annie Griffith show. It's the classic story. Older guy, nothing better to do, busybody control freak gets on the board, and everybody watch out now. There's a new sheriff in town, who's going to clean this place up. Hilarity, or is it headaches, follow. He initially got on the board because he ran uncontested and seemed to think that he was appointed dictator of the community. So McFife, as I'll refer to him from here on out, is such an unpleasant, disagreeable jerk to deal with that one by one, as board members' term came up, they simply didn't run again because they had it dealing with him. This allowed him to replace them with his hand-picked puppets, who just did whatever he told them to. Once he had full control of the board, McFife went wild. They started fining people for things that weren't actually prohibited, refused to grant anyone a hearing with the board, and simply ignored the bylaws and state law regarding the fine process. The typical scenario went like this. They would send out a violation letter. If you didn't do what they wanted within a week, the fines would start rolling in on a weekly basis, increasing in dollar amount each time with veiled threats of foreclosure soon to follow, even though you cannot foreclose for unpaid fines in Arizona. Most people were just getting intimidated and folded. When they tried fining us for things that aren't in the CC&Rs, I finally had enough and called them out on it, and let everyone else know what was going on. Their response was to carpet bomb the community with fines, especially the people they didn't like, while their friends were exempt. The more fines that they sent out, the more people complained. The more people complained, the more fines they sent out. In 8 months, they issued 5 times the number of fines that had been issued for the 3 previous years combined. The infamous Labor Day lambasting. As was par for the course, they scheduled the next meeting with minimal notice, 16 hours, and on a holiday in the hopes that no one would show up. To their surprise, a good 40 homeowners appeared intent on letting the board know just what they thought of their latest antics. At the end of the meeting, each homeowner had 2 minutes to address the board. It quickly degenerated into 40 minutes of one homeowner after the other excoriating. I looked it up, it's excoriating the board relentlessly. They really had no defense, and the meeting wrapped up with the former board member advising them that if they were unclear as to their duties, that perhaps they should schedule a consultation with the HOA attorney, which they did. The attorney had to spend 4 hours explaining the CC&Rs, bylaws, and state law to them, because they were incapable of figuring them out for themselves, and ultimately, they had to reverse all of the outstanding fines that they had sent out, since they weren't valid. This is all a bit of a setback for McFife, and for a few months, things were pretty quiet. No new fines were coming out, and we all figured that we had reined them in. Little did we know that McFife had other plans. Now to part 3, Emperor McFife Strikes Back. So after a few months of relative peace, the board was at it again. Here's a highly abbreviated recap of their reign of terror. One of the owners rents out the property, and as the latest tenant just moved out, she was doing some repairs and maintenance. The garage door and door leading into the house were open as workers were going in and out. One of the board members, clipboard in hand, just walked into the house unannounced, and then started dictating to the owner all of the things that they wanted done inside and out. You'll have to remove that tree, we don't like that kind. We'll provide you with a list of what we like. In fact, we really don't like the way your yard is landscaped at all. We want you to redo the whole yard. And here's what we want you to do inside. They're lucky the owner didn't tell them to shove their clipboard up their butt. One of the homeowners was having landscaping done in their backyard. The board demanded access to her yard so that they could see what she was doing, which they have no authority to do. She's originally from New York City and doesn't put up with any crap and told them to go frick off. Her property backs up to the common area, and later on, she caught them standing at her back wall, looking over into her yard. The north side common area is on a very busy street. This stretch had an abundance of well-established trees that had been there for over 30 years that acted as a natural sound barrier and privacy wall. Well, in a stroke of brilliance to save money, the board decided to turn all of the water off for the summer, which is regularly 100 degrees plus here in Arizona. None too surprisingly, probably 60% of the trees died. So now they say, we have to cut down the dead trees. But not only that, they decide to go one step further. The residents whose property backs up there had gotten into it with the board for shutting off the water in the first place. So as retaliation, they not only had the dead trees cut down, but every live tree that was opposite the backyards of the homeowners that complained. So many homeowners protested about the trees being cut down that they begrudgingly planted a handful of new trees. Well, 6 months later, they got mad at certain residents again, and as punishment, they went through and cut down every one of the new trees they had just planted. Of course, the homeowners whose property backs up here again complained vigorously. A year and a half later, they still hadn't planted any new trees. Given the residents any idea if they'd planned on putting any new trees, and couldn't or wouldn't give any kind of coherent explanation as to why they cut down the newly planted trees and live trees to begin with. McFife and his minions also weren't all that fond of what they considered non-whites either. This is what happens when those people move into a community. I also personally overheard him making anti-Semitic comments after one of the meetings directed at a friend of ours. Once after one of the meetings, my wife heard McFife fuming to the other board members. These people are going to have to learn to do as I say. Anyone who doesn't follow my rules and do what I tell them, when I tell them to do it, will be punished. They started hiring a uniformed police officer at $180, more wasted money, to attend the meetings specifically to throw out anyone who dared ask a question that they didn't like. Someone would ask a question that they couldn't or wouldn't answer, and their response would be, "We're not going to answer that at the current time." Or they would give a complete non-answer, and then want to move on. Here's a typical exchange. Homeowner would ask a question that they don't like. Board would refuse to answer or give a non-answer, then say, "We're going to move on." Homeowner, "But you didn't answer the question. One more word out of you, and we'll have the officer throw you out." A friend of ours was the only person actually ever thrown out because her response was, "So you either can't or won't answer the question. Which is it?" The president blew up shouting, "That's it. You're out. Officer, get her out of here now. Out! Get out! Get out now!" Our friend and the cop were laughing as he led her away. He followed them out into the hallway, yelling the whole time. That was the beginning of the end for them. People who had shown up to the meeting, saying that they wanted to see for themselves if things were as bad as we were saying, they were shaking their heads and looking around in disbelief. And then there was the harassment, vandalization, and defamation that was directed towards myself and my wife, that started after the infamous Labor Day meeting. It was well known that I was the one that alerted the neighborhood as to what was going on, so now I was labeled as the neighborhood troublemaker. Frequently, someone would steal my garbage cans and take them 4 blocks away and throw them into a busy street. The president of the HOA's kid wailed a big rock at my house. I heard it hit and had 2 witnesses, and I had to file a police report. The security lights on the side of my property were damaged. Someone, take a guess who, filed an anonymous complaint with the city saying that my property had dead trees and an accumulation of garbage, violating the city codes for blight. Of course, none of this was true, and the city inspector came by and promptly closed the case, as my property wasn't in violation of any city codes or any of the community CC&Rs, which is why they couldn't fine me for anything, which frustrated them to no end. And then there were the monthly newsletters, where we were specifically singled out month after month. They took things out of context, misrepresented others, or just flat out fabricated complete lies. The highlight of all this bullcrap came at the annual meeting, where I got the blame to be the feature of a 20-minute PowerPoint presentation, where they went so far as to take my actual emails, chopped them up, and pieced them together to try and make it look like as if I said things that I never did. I would have liked to see him try to defend that one in court. They tried to portray us as the neighborhood crackpot troublemakers who just don't want to follow the rules. We were single-handedly bringing the whole community down, turning it into a ghetto, driving the property values down, etc., etc. And this went on for a full 20 minutes. Virtually everything that was presented was willfully distorted and taken out of context. At one point, I had had enough and pointed out that he had misrepresented what I actually said by editing my emails, and they threatened to have the cop that they hired for the occasion, who would be a regular attendee from this point on, throw me out. It was difficult to keep from going off on them, but I had to because I was looking at the long game, which was to get them to be removed. Getting into a big argument with them and getting thrown out would have been counterproductive to that end, because they were still a lot of people who really didn't know the full story. After they had had their say, I nailed them to the wall, because I had concrete proof of them falsifying meeting minutes and election results, and handed out copies to everyone in attendance, which laid out the groundwork for their eventual downfall. Now, if you guys like this one, there's going to be a few more episodes on this topic. Tell me what you guys think of the series so far, and if you're liking this, one-by-one video structure. I hope you guys are having a good day, my voice is feeling good, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye.